Hello and welcome to the start of what I hope to be a successful endeavour. I'm your host, Kerean Watts, and this is episode 1 of Why Is This a Podcast, where I talk to people who basically I find interesting. I'm very excited about my first guest. She's the president of the consortium for social change, and in the interest of full disclosure, she is an associate of Baird CMC, which employs me, but Baird CMC is not involved in this series, so I just want to get that out of the way. So please welcome to episode 1, my very first guest, Denise Gray-Felder. Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. I mean, to be fair, we both know that we're all right because we've been speaking for about 20 minutes before we started the recording, but there we are. And I mean, and solidarity at the moment, it's very important between our neighbours, whether they're neighbours in the community or neighbours in the region.
Yeah, especially with the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
I think that we were the 3 states, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island, were successful ultimately because the governors of those states decided to work together.
And I have seen a lot of that. I mean, you've got Governor Murphy in your state, Governor Cuomo in New York. Forgive me, I don't know who the governor of Rhode Island is. I've got a vague...
Well, you know what? I hope that you don't ask me that question because I'm not remembering either. So,
Denise,
but
who is the governor of Rhode Island? I know it's a...
It's a small state.
I'm sure it's a woman. I'm sure it's a woman.
It is a woman, exactly. And she's done a nice job, too, with COVID.
I think she was on Biden's shortlist for his...
I don't remember that, no, but...
She, or at the very least, I think the media speculated that she would be.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
I'm looking it up because if I don't, it will drive me absolutely nuts.
Newman, does that sound familiar?
Newman sounds familiar. I think it might be Newman. See, I had the right caller asking you.
And that caller got my brain firmly kicked into gear, so it's. I think it might be.
Oh, no, it's not Newman. It's Gina Raimondo.
Oh, okay. Yes. I should know. During the Democratic National Convention, they did a thing from delegates from around the 50 states.
Yeah.
And the delegates from Rhode Island showed up with calamari because of Italian heritage.
I saw that. I did see that. Yeah. And I mean, how do you think Biden's doing at the moment?
Well, I'm hopeful that he's doing well enough to win. That's really what matters. By nature, I think, and also because of he's an intelligent human being, far more cautious of his public appearances now due to COVID. So we're not seeing as much of him as a candidate for president of the United States as we would have in other, election years. So that's a tad worrisome just because, of course, the current occupant of the White House is using every opportunity he can to get public visibility. And of course, it's much easier when you're a sitting president.
I mean, one of the arguments that I've seen about this is that Biden sort of, and it's both an attack line and it's something that people think, oh, it's helping him, is he's just in his basement. And I'm in two minds about it, but I do think that on the whole, Joe Biden, I do think he's doing a far more effective job than I thought he would as the Democratic nominee. And I do think that he's cleared two of the 3 hurdles that I thought he would have to clear, which the first one was who would he pick as his running mate? And I think Kamala Harris was a very good choice. The second one was the convention. And I think he acquitted himself there very well. And then the third one, which is, I think, only about the time that we're recording this, about 2 weeks away, which are the debates.
Yeah, exactly.
and he's doing far better than I thought he would.
Well, I agree with you, Kerean. I think it would be very hard for any intelligent, well-read politician to not do well in a debate against Donald Trump. Now, one could perhaps be outheard, if that's not a word, but one could be drowned out, let me phrase it that way, by some of the rhetoric that likely will come out of that debate.
Which
But
is, I think, my main worry about Trump debating Biden, which I think was part of the issue with when Hillary Clinton debated
mhm,
Trump, which was
right,
Trump has this phenomenal ability to just suck the air out of the room.
that's what I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, it's a very well honed diversionary tactic on his part. Though I don't know that he recognizes it as being a deliberate tactic, but it definitely feels like it is.
And one of the things that I say, one of my lines that I use with people is that Donald Trump is a terrible president. Sorry to all the QAnon supporters who heard me say that. I apologize. Please tune in next week when I speak to Steve Bannon. That's a lie. I am not speaking to Steve Bannon. Next week.
Funny, I just ran into him and he said he was looking forward to meeting you.
Oh, did he say that? No, he's not replying to my WhatsApp messages. No, but joking aside, Donald Trump, he's an awful president. I do believe that to my core, but he's a very good political candidate in terms of campaigning because he's got, I wouldn't call it charisma, but he's got magnetism. He's got this ability to draw people to him. And I mean, you can analyze that as much as you want to. You can analyze it from the perspective he comforts people, though quite how, I don't know. He appeals to people's basest instinct. But he is an effective, maybe I shouldn't have said good candidate, but he is definitely an effective one. Whereas Hillary Clinton, I think she would have been a good president, a competent president. She would have been, we know she's a skilled politician, but she wasn't a very effective candidate. And I'm just wondering, do you think that Biden is going to stumble into that trap?
No, I think they're very different personalities. And keep in mind that Hillary had some baggage in the presidential campaign. But I think the difference is, one, he was vice president to a hugely popular president. Now, of course, that President Obama was not hugely popular with most Trump supporters, I would imagine. But with other Democrats like Joe Biden, President Obama was hugely popular. The line of thinking that I hear a lot is, if Barack Obama deliberately chose him, then he must be okay. And he stayed there for 8 years. Mm-hmm. He really must be okay, because inside baseball would tell you that a vice presidential candidate from Delaware doesn't bring the campaign very much. It's a very small state. Nothing against Delaware. I love Delawareans, or whatever they're called. But it's a small state.
3 electoral votes, I think.
Electoral votes, exactly. But what Biden did have when he was chosen as vice president was a long history in the U.S. Senate, a long history of being able to negotiate on both sides of the aisle, the aisles of which Barack Obama himself had sat as a senator, a young senator from Illinois. So all of that brought, kind of helped the Obama campaign. With Hillary, unfortunately, a lot of the history that at least that people seem to have globbed onto, were the Clinton, her husband's legacy in some cases, and how she responded to many of the things that happened in his presidency. I don't even want to get into that. Then, her own baggage as Secretary of State, and then she had a key aide that didn't do her any favors, we'll put it that way. So it was very complicated. And then on top of it, she didn't show up at the last minute in at least two key states, Michigan and Wisconsin, the week of the election.
Which, I mean, I think, and I obviously that was a joke I heard told repeatedly was when Biden, they did move to I think it was a largely virtual convention. I think there was a little.
It was, yeah, it was.
But there was a joke that he said, "Oh, Biden's not going to Milwaukee, Wisconsin." So, oh, when's the last time that not going to Wisconsin ever hurt a Democratic presidential candidate? Oh dear. I don't think that Biden. I mean, Biden wasn't my choice for the Democratic nominee. Kamala Harris actually was my choice, so that's why I was, quite glad that he picked her to be his running mate. But I mean, there's no question in my mind, and it always comes back to me about Biden's life experience, about the loss of his first wife, the loss of his children, and the fact that when I see him talk about it, he has that there's a candor and there's a humility there, and there's an openness and an empathy that Donald Trump, I don't think, could ever hope to master. The argument that I've seen made by people is that it is that understanding of what it is to grieve and to experience loss that would equip Biden to lead the United States at this moment.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I just don't think it's the only thing that would equip him. For me personally, as a voter, there's clearly a sensitivity that is not an affectation. It's real. Joe Biden brings a sensitivity and a humanity as a person. Donald Trump is totally incapable of. Anybody I've not read the book, but I've certainly seen enough excerpts of the book by his niece and the interviews from his sister, who's a retired judge.
Marianne Trump.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
And knowing the background of his parents and how they apparently treated him in particular, for some reason, I don't know why him, it makes Joe Biden look far more human than the person that he's running against. And that is, I think, a good thing, the humanity that he brings to the role.
And I think that and that's a very, that's an excellent point, because I don't quite know how to say it, but Biden, the thing with Trump is he doesn't change. He's always the same, whereas Biden, and I think that the pandemic in particular has shown that Biden does have that capacity to evolve, to change for the better. Right. I mean, it's wrong for me to say that Trump can't change. He does change. He just changes for the wrong reason. He'll change his position on perhaps reproductive rights, for example. He'll change in whatever way he thinks will suit his best interests. Whereas I do think that this pandemic has shown that Biden is capable of evolving.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think for many of us that have been lifelong Democrats, there was never any question that Biden as a candidate was capable of changing, because there are not many, as you said earlier, there aren't many people that could go through the tragedies that he's gone through in his life and still be getting up every morning and going to work in the Senate for all the years he did, and then going to work in the White House for 8 years. Because me personally, I would be under a rock somewhere probably. Which is the reason why I'm not a politician. With Trump, though, I think fundamentally, it's not a question of whether he has the ability to change. I think it's fundamentally, you have a very damaged human being, Trump, very damaged. And from the time he was a very small child. And he actually, I don't think he can't see it. And if he could see it, he can't accept it. And if he can't accept it, he's not going to change it. The people that choose to support him are choosing to support him for very different reasons than why perhaps you or I would vote for a candidate. They like the celebrity. They like the thing that he's so gauche as to stand in front of groups of 500 people and call people names and slur ethnic groups and use curse words and whatever, that brings out something in them that I was not raised to believe was acceptable behavior. Hopefully, I think the majority of people in this country are more like me.
I think, and I think they are. I genuinely think that they are. I mean, I was in New York the year of the presidential election between Trump and Clinton. From my experience of Americans, of talking to Americans, yourself included, of course, I don't think that Donald Trump represents America. He certainly doesn't represent the best of America by any stretch of the imagination. I hope that people think that way about Boris Johnson, that Boris Johnson doesn't represent Britain. From time to time, I do have this deep fear that he does. But I mean, you and I, obviously, public health is what we spend a lot of our time on. I think I'm fairly confident I know the answer, but how do you rate Trump's performance on public health?
I would rate it on the level of being almost criminal. That there are nearly 200,000 people as of today that have died in this country from COVID-19. And that is the highest number in the world of deaths by COVID. In a country that has world-class, bar none, health research, health practice, hospitals, medical practices, practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why, if we had managed this COVID pandemic in earlier and in a serious way, led by the White House and the current occupant of the White House, you can never convince me that our number would be that high if there were someone else in the White House. And that, for me, has huge implications for public health policy. Now, whether, because, and it wasn't that the backup was not in place, meaning the CDC or the Center or the Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Center for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci's group, and the universities, the major public health universities across this country. The system and the research and the practice and the delivery of healthcare, the people that do it, is in place, but we were way behind the 8 ball. Even today, people are still not being told the direct truth about COVID-19.
I was going to ask about that with Bob Woodward's revelation,
right?
About Trump saying to him on I think it was February 7th, that he knew that that it was, I think his words were, more dangerous than even the strenuous flu. And then I think it was February 25th, 26th, where he was saying it was just a flu. Mm-hmm. Which, for me, the worst thing about that, for me, and I'm not even American, to me, the worst thing about that was the fact that I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised that Trump spent weeks, months lying through his teeth. It just seemed so in keeping with his character that that's what he would do.
Well, I think that, I don't know, I don't want to be judgmental, so I won't go so far as to say, to make a comment on his character, but it's clear, I'm sure you can probably figure out what I think. But I think that, who knows, he's a small-minded person. My feeling is that in the 3rd week of January, when he was notified that this was a serious disease that all countries should be worried about, he made a calculated decision that he didn't want to scare people because it would scare the stock market. And the reason that he cares, obviously, about the stock market is because he's an investor himself, obviously, and he has his family business that he worries about. And
also, I think he was staking at that time his re-election on the strength of the economy.
Exactly. And he still, to some extent, is. Exactly. So I would hope that any other occupant, and our history has proven in some ways that to be the case, that other occupants who have found themselves during times of disease or war or civil disobedience have made the right choices despite their personal interests and their personal desire to keep the economy strong or their political party affiliations. Lyndon Johnson is the one that pops into my head because I happened to be alive when he was president. You know, as a Southern Democrat from the state of Texas in the 60s, taking a position on civil rights legislation and listening to a short little black man named Martin Luther King Jr., who you just kept pushing for that legislation, wasn't a deal breaker with the Southern Democrats. And Lyndon Johnson knew that going into it. There was a reason he did not run for a second term.
And with you, I'll let you go in a moment because I know you're a very busy woman, and it's been absolutely fascinating. But I'm glad that you mentioned about Johnson and the civil rights movement, because one of the things that strikes me from what Bob Woodwards uncovered during his conversations with the president was his attitude towards Black Lives Matter. And, you know, at this time where, you know, you had obviously, of course, the death of George Floyd earlier this year, you had Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks, the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. And to find out that, again, as with what Woodward revealed about Trump's attitude towards COVID and downplaying it, that again was the most jarring thing for me, was the fact that I wasn't surprised in the slightest that was his attitude. And you know, as a woman of color yourself, I you know, how do you feel? But when you hear him dismissing entirely out of hand the man elected and inaugurated, who took the oath of office as your president, how do you feel when you hear that those are his attitudes, those are his words?
Initially, it was difficult to hear. We hear it so much now that, frankly, you just sort of, you know, one puts on her protective shield and you stop listening sometimes. It's maddening because Barack Obama was a hugely popular president, even among people who did not vote for him. Now, the thing that, of course, his legacy that people who did not support him fall back on always is the Affordable Care Act, which is obviously a policy issue that you and I care a lot about. So there's still people out there that, you know, Barack Obama is, you know, is satanic-like in their minds because of having the audacity to believe that every United States citizen should be able to afford health care.
How dare we demand people have health care? How dare we?
Well, exactly. And you know, and frankly, Kerean, we're oftentimes not educated enough as a society to realize how so many other countries in this world do provide health care for their citizens. You know, you know, included. And that doesn't seem to bother them at all. It doesn't seem to bother many people around here that, you know, an immigrant family that has mom and dad that work $17, $18 an hour at the most and minimum wage at the worst, which in some states is as low as $7.25 an hour. You can't feed 3 kids. You can't feed 1 kid on that. Working in restaurants and, you know, scrubbing floors in hospitals and healthcare facilities cannot afford to pay for healthcare. So I think that President Trump's going on about healthcare was to be expected. His ranting against Black Lives Matters and other things that are racial or representative of the diversity of this country is also not to be unexpected if we would bother as the American people to understand our history and to understand the history of the candidates that we're asked to vote for. Donald Trump took a very strong stand against Central Park 5. This is a man, you can't look at him simply as a man who's made a lot of money, because even that perception has a whole backstory. His dad left him a ton of money. It wasn't like you and I going out and starting a new business and saying, wow, we became billionaires overnight on our own accord. This guy was handed a lot of what he has. He's lost a ton of money. He's ruined a lot of business lives in my state right now, my adopted state of New Jersey, in Atlantic City, with his failed casinos.
Mm-hmm.
And, destruction sort of follows him around. People that support him don't do their homework.
Because we mentioned his niece, Mary L. Trump, earlier.
Right.
And one of the interviews that she gave about her book, Too Much and Never Enough, she said that Donald Trump, she said, has been allowed his entire life to fail upwards spectacularly.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Exactly. That's exactly right. And, he's also very good at pointing, if we want to use a visual, it's this. It's always someone else's fault. He's always pointing away from himself. Yeah. It's never anybody's fault in anything that happens to him.
It's him. It's her.
Exactly.
Over there.
And frankly, most people in the world are not raised to be that way. You're raised to have some basic principles and take responsibility for yourself and your families, yes. But, I don't know too many people that even come close to bordering on that sort of self-centered, it's my way or the highway mentality. Thank God I don't.
It's why I think he doesn't get Black Lives Matter.
Exactly.
Because he has no concept of why what they're talking about, what they're asking for, what they're fighting for.
Right.
I think that's why he doesn't get it. And people say to me about George Floyd, for example, about his sort of his history, his criminal history. And I say to them, I don't care what his criminal history was. I don't care about how he lived his life, so to speak. I care about how his life ended. And his life ended with someone's knee on his neck for the better part, I think, of 9 minutes, while he was begging for breath. And that is wrong, regardless of who he was.
Right. Well, and also, there's just so many things. You have to go even before that happened. It was a kid working in a store where he presented this $20 bill that was allegedly counterfeit. And maybe it was, who knows? But, this kid had been told by his employer that if that happens, to call the police. So what did he do? Kid, I think he was 17 or 18. I shouldn't call him a kid, but this young man. So that's what he did. He calls the police. So first of all, what police department in any major city, anywhere else on earth, would show up with two people and two officers in a car and a backup car for a $20 counterfeit? Why would you send that kind of force for a $20 US dollar counterfeit claim? Second of all, so once you get there, the guy says to the cop, I'm claustrophobic. Did any of them ever hear that? He said it 3 or 4 times as you look at the tape. I'm claustrophobic, can't get into that car. Third, he was driven to that store by someone else, a friend of his. He did not drive himself. So there was a friend that came with him. Did anybody ever stop to say anything to that individual that was with him, that we need to take him to the station, following the normal police procedures? Nobody would get handcuffed for a $20 counterfeit example unless they knew at that time that he was a convicted felon. I don't see anything on the tape, maybe I'm wrong. I didn't see anything on the tape that showed that they had called in to read his background. So all of these things, everything just sort of spiraled into this wrong way, arresting and apprehending an individual. And all of it was because he didn't matter to them in their eyes. He was not a person that mattered.
I have seen the video. I forced myself to watch it. I am never going to know in my lifetime how he felt in that moment. For me watching it, obviously it's not the worst thing about the video, but for me watching it, that's the thing that hit me, was I'm never going to know how he felt in that moment. And I'm never going to know what his children feel.
To relate this back real quickly to Donald Trump and public policy, in particular, though, this is important because Donald Trump is not alone in this country where people who do not see, they literally don't, they see through or around Black people. They see through or around poor people. They see through or around people who are Spanish speaking and people that are poor, because they never have to interact with those people that they somehow believe must be subhuman, unless it is in a role that is catering to them. So cleaning their houses or cleaning their hotels or serving them in restaurants or cleaning kitchens in restaurants or whatever. And that fundamentally is a public policy disaster in this country, that we have not come to grips with slavery and the impact of slavery after 400 years in this country, and nearly 400 years in this country. It is 400 years in this country. Donald Trump, as a person of privilege and arrogant on top of it, has believed that people of color do not matter to him, when we've never, in my lifetime at least, had a president who didn't at least pretend that he cared about every single citizen in this country and every single voter. And Donald Trump doesn't even bother to pretend. Therein is a huge issue, because when it comes to healthcare policy, of course, he wants to destroy the Affordable Care Act. Of course, he didn't care initially about having masks for poor people that were cleaning hospitals floors and hospital rooms. And he didn't frankly even care apparently that much about a mask shortage, because he didn't believe that it was a problem that was going to impact him and the circles in which he travels.
It's a poignant note to end on, given sort of the racial disparity in COVID-19 deaths, and the fact that, as you said, that he just doesn't care. Put it this way: best of luck for November. Denise Gray-Felder, president of the Consortium for Social Change. Privileged to talk to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining me, for being my very first guest on the very first episode of Why Is This a Podcast? Thanks so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Why is this a podcast? Watch, guys.
Why is this a podcast? Hopefully we'll find an answer to that one of these days. Please join us again. Take care. Stay safe. And God bless you.
Thanks, Kerean. All the best to you too.
Bye.